David, if I could come to you first, we'll talk about the domestic implications in a moment, but just looking at the referendum campaign, there's been a lot of fear raised, as Peter was saying there, about the possible economic implications. Do you buy any of those arguments?
Look, it's very clear to me that Scotland could be an independent economy. There's no doubt. The Scottish economy is bigger than the Irish economy. Its rate of unemployment is half of our rate of unemployment. It has oil. We know it has oil. Its population structure is actually quite young in comparison to other parts of the UK. So this is a substantial economy that could survive on its own without any real problems. That's the first thing. There are issues, but it could survive on its own. That's the first thing. It could even thrive on its own. So you're talking not about a bit of the United Kingdom. What you're talking about is an economy that is 190 billion euros GDP. So it's big. So there's no reason to believe it can't survive and thrive.
OK, but we saw in Robert Short's report there, we saw Jim Murphy, the former Scottish Secretary, saying they pay, what was it, 53 billion a year in taxes, including oil taxes, and get 65 billion back. So you're starting with a...
If you reduce economics to the budget deficit, you're actually putting the cart before the horse. The question is, how do you get there? And can the Scottish economy be dynamic enough to generate revenue over the course of, let's say, 10 years, and to reduce its expenditure to narrow that budget deficit? In actual fact, the budget deficit doesn't matter a lot, as long as they can finance themselves, and I have no doubt they can. So I think that people have to stand back and see what is happening in Scotland is you have an economy and a country that going independent now is probably the best time they could ever do so, because for the next 40 years they have oil revenues, and substantial oil revenues, and they will probably deploy an investment strategy to attract in multinationals like our own. Their wages are much lower than Ireland, one of their main competitors. So if you actually take yourself out of this campaign and think, can this entity not only survive but thrive, there's absolutely no reason to believe it can't. What we're getting now is a very clear policy of scaremongering on the part of the establishment in Westminster, and by that I mean the political parties and the corporate bloc, because they don't want change. OK, well, let's take it as read that there might be scare tactics being used. We certainly have seen that in other campaigns. But at the same time, if you're going to end a 307-year relationship, there are going to be complications, and particularly over currency. There's no doubt. There's no doubt there's going to be complications. But that's the negotiation. That's the negotiation process, and it will be long and it will be very, very difficult. But take the currency option. The currency is the one that everyone's going on about. And I even saw Mark Carney, the Bank of England governor, coming out yesterday and saying having a currency union between Scotland and England is anti-sovereign. Now, that's a ludicrous thing to say. There are dozens of countries that deploy the currencies of other countries. For example, and they don't even have to be in any way connected. For example, years ago, and I worked down there, Bulgaria in 1996 decided to, in effect, peg themselves to the dollar. And they could do it. So this notion that there's some massive currency complication that changes the dynamic to such an extent that Scotland could not manage A, the transition, and B, be a normal country generated by a normal society and financed, seems to me to be not necessarily that credible. OK, very briefly before I bring my other two guests in, you mentioned investment strategy, inward investment. This is great news for Scottish independence. It's not great news for us. Irish people, we've got to realise that in the drawer, the top drawer in Edinburgh, if there's a yes vote, and even if there's not, they will get significant fiscal powers after this. In the drawer is a thing called the IDA approach to direct foreign investment. And the Scots are just going to take it out and put a massive big cross of St Andrews on it, exactly the same policy. And the Nats have been talking about this for a long time. Salmon has been talking about this for a long time. So what they will do is they will say, do you remember you thought there was only one European country that was English-speaking, that had a very good workforce, that had low corporation tax, and that the wages were relatively affordable? Well, there's not. There's another one now, and it's called Scotland. And they will do exactly what we are doing. And that, I believe, is a threat to Ireland, because the pitch has been ours, more or less, for the last 20 years. And as long as Scotland was part of the UK corporation tax was never going to be touched, because London didn't want it touched, and ultimately the Scots couldn't play the game we're playing. Now they're on the pitch.
About your Scottish grandparents, if they hadn't moved here and you were there, what would you be doing?
I would vote yes if I were there, because I think there's something very exciting about the right to govern your own affairs. I think this is something that is deep inside all of us. And from talking to relations in Scotland, I think they feel the same way. Even if it goes no, modestly no, it will change. This event is going to change the relationships between ourselves, England, Scotland and Northern Ireland in a way in which people wouldn't have even contemplated 2 or 3 months ago.
OK, David, Owen and in Belfast, Mike, thank you all for joining us.